Hey everyone, welcome to the Derick Leg podcast. It's been about a week and a half since we've done one. I've really been looking forward to this one. First, I want to jump into the housekeeping, if you want to call it that. So if you like the episode, please share it. If you don't like the episode, please still share it. We're trying to get the word out. We're building our community really, really fast. It's been nice because all the guests that have been on, we've kind of picked up their following. They've picked up ours. So as we keep going, it'll keep growing. But hit the subscribe, like, leave a comment, 5 stars, however you're watching. So today we've got Kassandra Nielsen.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually reached out to me when I put it open that, if anyone wants to be on. I think it was Danny that we had last time, and then you were number 2. So,
cool.
So I thought we kind of mix it up, but we've had a lot of guys on and Nicole. So
I thought about that too. I'm like,
yeah,
for the ladies.
So what's been going on? Tell me a little bit about the last couple weeks.
It's been going good. So I started my own business called The Whole Soul. I do rapid eye technology, which is like a neuroscience technique. We tap into the neural pathways and remove trauma from like the very beginning, the first time it was created. And you can use it for like stress. And I actually was just talking to a client today, and she's like, I have to take my like board exams in September, and she has like mad test anxiety. And that's like legit. Like people, I mean, yeah, you can have it for anything, right? Like get really freaked out or nervous or anxiety or depression, whatever it is.
Sure.
And for her right now, it's like, oh, I'm going to take this test. And so she's like, hey, can we do a session? I also do like imageries.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
Well, I want to ask you this first because it kind of popped in my head.
Mm-hmm.
How does someone know when trauma starts?
So that's
like
exactly.
How far back can you even go?
From the very beginning.
Really?
We literally go from like birth, even like pre-birth, because you're a fetus. Yeah. And like science tells us that you hear everything around you when you're in utero.
Makes sense.
So like if you're in a chaotic environment, or your mother was, or whatever happens, right? Like what if she got in a car accident? What if she was around someone, at Walmart or something, and they're like freaking out, or like there's a million different things that happen that we just dismiss.
Huh.
And it's like there's record of it. Have you heard of Your Body Keeps the Score?
I have not.
A book. It's so good. Yeah, check it out. But it's all about how your body remembers every single thing you go through, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually. Like it's recorded. And so even in utero, like, it's there.
Okay, sorry. So imagery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm not familiar with that.
So it's kind of like...
I'm not going to be familiar with a lot of this.
That's
I'm just
okay.
a part-time safe salesman.
That's okay. So ask away. Like if you're not sure, ask me.
Yeah.
But imageries are super great. We go into, it's kind of like a meditation, like a guided meditation. But what I do is I cater it towards you. So you would tell me, hey, like this example, she's like, test anxiety. And I'm like, hey, I can totally do a catered imagery towards you. Like, and you can tell me what it is. Like, is it the time? Do you get freaked out about time? Is it like multiple choice questions, right? Like most of the time when you have experienced something, it'll go back toward an event that they can kind of remember or recall. And if it's a series of them, like, boom, tell me all those. Like, I'll incorporate all of that in the imagery with you and then send that over to you. And it's like your own special mindfulness catered toward just you.
Wow, that's cool.
And I do it for like businesses too. I've had people approach me about that, which I'm super excited to get going on that end too. Like kind of create like so like in business, if I have a friend who her whole thing is like she's helping other people in their business, and she wants to help like overcome hurdles that it is for them, like if it's their setback because they have a money mind gap, or they don't feel confident enough, or whatever it is, right? Like we can work through that. And if it's like the business structure, I can be like catering it toward that exact business and what it is in that business that they want me to kind of bring in for that client.
I mean, is it hard to pinpoint that? I mean, I guess it'd be different for everybody, but I think like now you're really opening my mind to how all this would work. Because when you would pull yourself back to that experience that you already had, I mean, that is, lack of better words, like the personality, like that's how it tracks your personality. And how things have happened in your past is how you would react to it now. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, say I had a trigger that was being lied to,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Uh-huh.
And when you were a child, maybe you were lied to a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That would probably be easier to pinpoint, but at the same time, whenever you're being lied to for the rest of your life, if you don't change that trigger, it would keep firing that same
100%.
memory.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's actually neuroscience.
Okay.
So like when anyone is lied to or abandoned, right? So like it's that like one initial thing that happens. I had abandonment. So it's like that abandonment is there in the neural pathway. And then what happens is when you don't take care of it and you keep going through your life and say like my mom didn't pick me up from school or a friend like canceled on me or didn't show up when they said they were going to. And here I am thinking like I'm abandoned, and my brain is actually gathering that evidence on its own. Like
Right.
I didn't, tell it that,
Right.
but it just does that. And it's gathering that evidence to prove like, oh, see, like you're abandoned. That's what happened to you. And it gathers it, even if it's in a whole different way. Like it doesn't have to be like lied to about a certain thing. Like you said, it's just like being lied to in general, even if it's in a roundabout way and they don't even realize that's what it is, right? Like
Sure.
it still causes that neural pathway to build it. And then it's like more dysfunction and distortions happening.
So I had done a little bit of business coaching. Well, I'm still a part of it. It's the Arate Syndicate with Ed Milet and Andy Frisella.
Okay.
They talk about when they refer to it as triggers. It's the same thing you're talking about. When you have that trigger and then it fires off let's call it a negative emotion, how to change that is to put a positive or the emotion that you want to assign to it. And then as that keeps happening, if it happens again, you assign that other positive one to it, positive one to it, positive one to it, and then it starts to take that transformation. Is that kind of what we're doing?
Neuroplasticity. That's what that's called.
Okay.
Yep.
See, I
so
know
you're
something.
literally, right? You're literally rewiring your brain when you do that. The cool thing about our brains is they actually don't know the difference between positive and negative. It's us that associate it with that or whatever it is. Like to our body and our brain, it's just all learning. Like that's all.
Sure.
But if you don't want it, that's the key, is like if it's an undesired emotion, feeling, thought, whatever it is, memory, trigger, right? Like if you don't want it, then reframe it, restructure it. And just like what you're saying, it can be done in a lot of different ways. For a lot of people, they just don't have those tools yet.
Okay.
I know I didn't for a long time. Like especially depending on how much trauma we're talking about or what exactly it is, it can take a while, like you keep operating out of that and you don't even necessarily know that your brain's doing it on its own. You think there's something wrong with you. You think it's normal, like you're not even aware to actually acknowledge it. But that's where the power is. Like once you start acknowledging that and realizing like, hey, there's something here that's incongruent, like it doesn't sit right with me. And that's why I feel so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But what happens a lot of times is we're like, the incongruency happens and we don't know that that's what's happening, and we feel these uncomfortable feelings and emotions and we don't like it. And so then what happens is either consciously or subconsciously, us or our body, which is basically the same thing, right, will do something different. Like it can disassociate or it can become passive aggressive, just a lot of different things like that. Or you can like numb it, right? You can be like, you know what, instead of feeling this because it's so uncomfortable. I actually did facilitating for the addiction recovery program for 3 years.
Okay.
Every single week for 3 years. I had people come in and they would talk about reading. They were like obsessively reading, shopping. I don't know if you're familiar with Gabor Mate, but he's heavy into a lot of this. And he talks about that, like he was addicted toward work and spending money and different things like that. And so it can be anything, like anything that is getting you to not address that and to not feel those uncomfortable feelings is an unhealthy coping mechanism.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of Joe Dispenza?
Mm-mm.
You don't know? You need to look him up. He goes through a lot of this
Joe
stuff.
Dispenza.
He's Dr. Joe Dispenza. So
Maybe it sounds familiar.
I bet you've heard of him being in this field.
Yeah.
He talks a lot about, and I could butcher this, so bear with me here.
Yeah.
He talks about like when your body just reacts to things, that is your body. But when you can control your mind to react to things, like it's your personality when your body reacts, but when you control it, it's not.
Oh, that's
I
interesting.
think it's something like that. It's
okay.
And you'll have to listen to it. Maybe I should go refresh and come back on here and correct that.
But
But that's kind of the gist of it. And he talks about how your brain interacts. He talks about how you can rewrite your personalities. He talks about all kinds of stuff, and he has all the science to back it all up. So it's pretty crazy. You should listen to it.
So that's one thing that I've learned a lot in rapid eye technology when I was in school, and things we talk about is like a personality, because I'm like, I love psychology, right? Like all growing up, that's what interests me, like reading the books for fun. Like I have psychology books I'm just reading for fun. I don't necessarily read like anything else anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's all like, and I have like a million. Like if I go places, it's like this giant stack. But anyway, I love the like Myers and Briggs, or there's even like the Enneagrams. And these are very helpful tools to utilize. But when we identify with them and we like take that on, then it's like, oh, we're identifying with that characteristic, when in reality we can change it, like you're saying. And so then it becomes more of like we're using it. Like I could be like, oh, well, I'm not going to do that right now because I'm just a passive aggressive type. So like, nope, or whatever, right? And then instead of being like, hey, you know what, this is showing me what like my personality has been molded to through trauma, what my body and mind has done. And I'm going to use that to help me remap it and be like, oh, I actually don't want to be that way anymore. So now I'm going to change it through thought patterns. And in Rapid Eye, we have a ton of different tools. Like there's mirror work we do like body work. It's very much in your body. And so we do a lot of that. There's just a lot of tools just besides the actual Rapid Eye technology, where I have like an eye frequency device and we have like a script we go over. They've done tons of science behind like what triggers there are, what traumas there are in people, and created scripts based on that. And there's like a ton of them. And then that's the cool part, is we learn neuroscience. And so we learn how to cater it toward just you.
Okay.
So then you wouldn't have to sit here and tell me like, like in traditional therapy, which I'm not knocking, but like the thing with that is a lot of times you go into your story and you rehearse it and you rehearse it and you rehearse it. And what that's actually doing a lot of time is backing that up in that neural pathway, and you're reiterating the trauma.
Makes sense.
Right?
You're just making it more strong in your mind.
Yeah. And so then it's like, dang, like you're actually being hindered in that process a lot of times. And so what we do is we'll just kind of like touch on things, and it's all like you, like nobody knows you better than you. Right. Like,
right.
And like, this is the other principle with Rapid Eye, is like, you're actually a whole soul, which goes along with like cognitive behavioral therapy. Like nobody is actually broken or damaged. What happens is when, here's your soul and you go through trauma, and then your body and your mind protects itself. So it creates a shell or a layer over it, which could be passive aggressiveness or like obsessive anger or disassociation or multiple personalities, bipolar, and it can shell and keep going, depending on how much trauma you're talking about. And so what we do is we try to go from the very beginning that was created and then knock it from there. And so that's kind of what we do in Rapid Eye, is we'll talk to you, figure out like, okay, what it is. Tell me exactly for you in a certain amount of words, whatever you're comfortable with, without sitting here rehearsing it. And then it's like, hey, that's it. We don't need to counsel. I don't counsel you. It's like, I'm just going to do this technical process and remove that trauma, and then we can go from there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's super cool.
So how long have you been doing this? I know you started the business
just super frequently.
Okay.
Just in the last couple months. I've been doing it since the beginning of this year. Okay. Which is a cool story. So I was trying to figure out where to go. I was thinking I'm just going to pick up my traditional schooling that I was doing, which, not bashing that at all, which was marriage and family. Like I said, I love like all psychology. So I'm like eating it up. But then I had a huge trauma happen in my life. And so I just dropped it. And, I'm sitting here like praying, like I'm a super religious person, so I'm like praying, okay, like what do I do? Where do I go? And my mentor, my Rapid Eye technician then, I had experiences with her that like, I had went through trauma, and I did trauma therapy for 3 years, and it was great. Like, my trauma therapist was great. He helped me so much. But I still had these things that I was like, why? And at this point, I'm like aware, like
Right.
I've learned a lot. So I'm like aware that this is still here. I'm reacting in these ways that I don't want to. I'm uncomfortable. And I had heard about her a while ago, but I was like, not ready, and finally I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to try this out, And so I go see her, and it was like amazing. I mean, I'm not even kidding. I literally felt like, is this a miracle? Like, for me, it was. And like, not trying to downplay it at all. It was a miracle for me.
Sure.
And like, I literally was like, you have to tell me, like, did you just receive all of this? Like, how did this happen? Because
Like,
for me, it was like my inner soul. Like, she saw and she knew like everything that I needed to get over, and not even get over, right? For lack of a better word. It's like to just move forward with, like, the things that I knew were there, but I couldn't identify. And she could. And I was just like, tell me, and she was like, that whole thing was my script.
Yeah.
And I was just like,
And you're like, I'm in.
yeah, like mind blown. And then, so yeah, exactly. And then, come around to the beginning of this year / the end of last year. And I'm sitting here like, okay, now I know that I need to do this, but how am I going to make this work? Like, single mom, 4 kids, like, I don't make a lot of money. I don't have a lot of income yet.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, how's this going to work? And they call me up and they're like, so, we have a scholarship. If you want to start right now, it's enough to get you started. And like, she even told me, she's like, a lot of times with people, when we can tell that they really want to do this and they'll work for it and work hard, like, we can set up payment plan for you.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm in.
Yeah.
And then here was the other catch. She's like, also, like, most people have a whole year to do this program. And what they do is, like, they give you the content, and it's very self-paced because they know trauma. So they're not trying to be like,
Right.
you have a deadline. Like,
you have an
that
hour
test.
to finish 100 questions.
Exactly. And like, super like, oh, you fail, F or whatever. Shame. No, it's nothing like that. And she was like, but like, in a couple months, like, we have our graduation coming up. So it's your choice. Like, if you want to do it now, like in these couple of months, or you can wait. And I was like, I'm going for it. You know, like, I'm ready.
Wait for what? Yeah.
Right. And so I did. I just went for it. And it's just been amazing to see. And like, what I'm learning. And that's the cool part too, is like, so meanwhile, I was working in my typical 9 to 5, trying to figure out what to do, making, dirt money. Right. Which is fine. Hustle. Right.
Yeah, everyone's got
right?
to. Yeah.
Right. But meanwhile, I'm studying and I'm doing these things, meditating. And I kept having like neuroscience come to me. So I'm like jotting down things while I'm working, and I'm like, just grabbing paper. I'm like, oh, writing this down, and I kept writing neuroscience down. And that was like one of the first things she told me was like, well, rapid eye technology is really neuroscience. And I was like, oh,
there it is.
There we go. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, if we can dive into a little bit of your trauma, if you're open to that.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of let you decide how far back you want to go.
Okay.
I know maybe let's just start with last 2 years ago.
3 years this year.
3 years this year. Okay. I'll kind of let you guide the conversation if that's all right. Obviously I'm pretty aware of what happened,
Right.
and I was, anyway, I'll let you start. You go ahead, and then I'll kind of jump into.
Okay. So about 3 years ago, do you want me to like tell the story?
Sure.
Okay. So about 3 years ago, I had a knock on my door. And I was like, and it was at 4:00 in the morning. And I was like, okay. And at this time, my mom lived with me. We were up north. And I was like, this is strange. Like, who's at the door? So I go downstairs, and I didn't have my front porch lights on. So I was like, dang it. So I was like, who is it? And they're like banging on the door. I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, it's the police. And I'm all freaking out at this point now. I'm like, oh crap. Like, what did I do wrong? I'm like trying to jog my memory. Did I do anything wrong? No. Okay. So what is this? And so I bring my mom down, and mom, will you open this door? Like, I'm freaking out. I go into like a shock mode. I really did. I think at that point I just kind of knew something was really wrong. So my mom, love her to death, opened the door for me, and like all these police file in to my home, like 5, 6, 7 of them, I think. Actually, I think it was 7. And I'm just like, what is going on? And they're all standing there, and I'm sitting on the couch, and they're like, are you Kassandra? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, do you know Spencer Tafua? And I'm like, yeah, that's the father of my kids, you know? And they're like, there was an incident in St. George, and he was killed. He was shot. And I was like this, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you
like, what do you say?
And I was in legit shock. And I just was like, what? Like, what do you mean? What happened? You know? And they're like, there was an incident. We don't know a whole lot. But yeah, he was shot. And
you guys have been married.
Mm-hmm.
And how long were you married? I mean, you've been together
almost
since
10 years.
high school?
Yeah, I was 16 when we met.
Okay.
Yeah, so altogether about 14 years.
Wow. Okay.
Almost 15, I think.
And 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And so, and that's what, okay. So like I'm sitting here in shock, and I'm, you know, they're giving me a few like tidbits of information. 'Cause at that point, like it was still very much like nobody really knew.
Yeah.
And my mom just looked at me, and she was like, the kids. And I was just like, oh, you know, it hit me so hard. And then they left, and I went and sat down, and I freaked out. And it was interesting too, because I looked at my phone, and I had all these missed calls from like his sister and his mom and his sister-in-law and just everybody. And then I was just like, whoa. And so I called them. Well, actually my mom did, because I was like I was not coherent. And I was just, I mean, I was yelling, I was screaming, I was hyperventilating. I literally I'm remembering a lot more. Like my mom had me grab a bag, and I'm like, because I couldn't breathe. Yeah, I legit was like, I mean, it was like definite panic attack. And they were crying, and they told me, you know, like, yeah, he's gone. And I was like, are you sure? You know, like, no, like not Spencer, right? Like, no, like check again. I literally was telling them that, check again. Like this has got to be wrong. Like, yeah, like I was refusing to believe it. And I actually said that. I said, I refuse to believe this. I'm not going to believe this. And it was like that for like, I don't even know, probably 2 hours. I was literally having like the world's most massive panic attack. And then I would just go in spirals where I was like, you know, I'm like panicking, breathing, and just freaking out. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to believe this. Like, nope, this is not happening. Like, I'm sure he's going to be fine. Like, you know, I'm sure there's something we can do, right? Like, I'm just in a huge trauma mind. And so that morning, like, it just is a huge blur. I was just insanely emotional. But I remember thinking, how in the world am I going to tell my children this? You know, and like at this point, let's see. So Tegan will be 13 in September. Talon's 11. Kalea's 9. And Callista's 5.
Yeah. And
so 3 years ago, right? A lot younger. Especially Callista, you know, like, and I'm like, how am I going to tell them this? And like, how do you even understand this?
Right.
When you're that age? Yeah. And I didn't want to like make it more like traumatizing than it already was. So I'm like brainstorming, thinking, you know, and I just like, oh, I just did not want to talk to anyone. And like, that's the thing too, is like my phone blew up.
Sure.
My phone blew up. Like people are messaging me on Facebook and like texting me nonstop. And like, Cassie, like, is this really true? Like, and I was just so angry and upset. Like, I just wanted everyone to leave me alone. I was like, how can you put, like, this is my mind. I'm like, how can you possibly think I'm coherent to talk right now? You know, like, I'm just like, and like Spencer and I were best friends. Like, that's the thing too, is like, we were divorced at that time, but man, like we were such great co-parents. Like, he's my best friend. I knew him better than anyone, and he knew me better than anyone, you know, like we had each other's back. And I told him that. I'm like, I will always have your back. And like, he would come up and visit, and like, yeah, we were just so close, you know, we talked about everything. And so it just rocked my whole universe, you know, to my core. And going forward a little more, it was just like trying to process that. I mean, going into sudden loss, there's no words for it. There's really not. It's when you experience it, it's just a whole new, like you're not expecting it at all, and like so young. And then here's the thing that shook me. It's like, I am now the only person that these children have on this earth, as far as like, you come in, two people make these children, and now like here I am.
Yeah.
And to carry that, the responsibility of that.
I understand that, yeah.
Yeah, it was just next level.
Well, what was it like for you going through that? I mean, the sudden loss, like you're saying, you had a couple of days where it was probably I don't know if a blur is the right way to say it, but
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure. Well, let me throw in where I'm at. So my two older brothers hung out with Spencer from high school, right? From high school on.
And like young high school,
not seniors.
Right.
Yeah. And they played football. Adam and him played football together. Mike and him always ran around together through the years. Yep. And he kind of like grew up at our house.
Mm-hmm. I know.
He was
I've
at our
heard
house
so many
all
stories.
the time.
Yeah.
And even to me, it was like an older brother to me too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know my brother Jason felt the same way. Jason even ran around with him.
Right.
I'm 4 or 5 years younger. And so,
5 years.
I mean, I was around him a lot, but not like my older brothers were anyway.
Yeah, I remember coming over and playing like Call of Duty and like Ghost Recon.
Ghost Recon. We did a lot of Ghost Recon at the lake house.
Yep.
But I even felt it. So it happened in December, and my anniversary is at the end of December. And so my wife and I were driving down to Vegas just to we're pretty busy. Like we got a hotel for the night. I think that was our anniversary. And halfway down, it just emotions hit me, and I was just overcome with it all. Yeah. And I remember just sitting in the passenger seat, and my wife's driving, and I was like, I'd been through a couple of deaths in my life where like I had I guess you'd call him a mentor, pass away. And then, I mean, I have so many stories of Spence where it was like, he was sticking up for you. He was the nice guy. He was calming everything down. I mean, he was the guy.
Right.
And like, I could understand why you're saying like, you guys are best friends, because that's who he was.
Oh, 100%.
I think everyone that knew him probably felt like they were his best friend, right?
I love
because that's how he treated.
Yeah,
he treated everybody that way.
He really did.
And anyway, we're driving down to Vegas, and I mean, I'm kind of a baby. Like, I'm emotional. And so I just start crying. And my wife's like, what the heck's going on, right? Like, I wasn't talking about it or anything. I just start crying.
So she didn't know, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, she had known what happened, but she didn't know how it was affecting me. And my two older brothers, like Adam was very involved.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
He was at the hospital, I believe, right after he found out, and Mike was there. Yep. And I kind of didn't get to have that. I didn't feel like, they got to kind of deal with it and grieve over it and all that. And I just was like, they told me, and I'm like, geez, that's crazy. But they were going through it, and I felt like I had to kind of step back from it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we're driving down, I start crying, and my wife's like, what's going on? Are you okay?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm just so sick of like the best people that I know around here getting taken. Yeah. And she's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, when I die and go to heaven, that's going to be my question. Like, there's all these crappy people on the earth, right? Like, why do the guys that everyone look up to, not everyone, right? But why do the people like that have to be taken is what I'm getting at. Yeah. And even then, this was probably a week or two after the incident, like there still no one was able to talk about it. There was no details out. No one knew what happened. There was a lot of rumors getting spread.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was very inspirational to me because of the person he was, if that's a good way to put it. I mean, I had always viewed him as a brother. We did a lot of flag football together. We did a lot of things together. And he was one of those guys that you always felt safe around.
Oh, totally. He had all these friends that like they'd go to the hill and just chill.
Yeah.
And they'd have sessions, right? Like that's what they call them, is
Right.
like, let's go to the hill and have a session. And he would, I mean, because, right, like we were married, so he would talk to me about a whole bunch of stuff, and he wouldn't go into detail about these guys' things, but he would be like, yeah, you know, like they confided in me, and everyone did. Like
Yeah.
he was very much a mentor and a coach for a lot of people. I mean, he really was, and that's just who he was, you know, like as a person, that's just who he was.
I mean, for me, and everyone can have their own opinion about him, but for me, the two things that stood out for me was you were always safe. You always felt safe around him, and you could always trust him.
Yep.
I mean, like I said, I don't have as many experiences as my brothers do with him, but he still, you know, touched my heart with that.
Yeah.
Even being around him as seldomly as I was. But anyway, I don't want to steal this. So back to what you're saying.
Well, and like, so that I'm glad that you mentioned that, actually, because that's one of the things with loss that I've learned. I have learned so much through this experience, so much more than I ever can honestly tell you I would have ever wanted to.
Yeah.
I am very grateful for it, though. I'm grateful for the learning. Obviously not what happened, right? Like you adapt. You never really get over something like this. It's definitely something that's just working through and that's like grief. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, bringing all of this up. In psychology, there's definitely like grief stages. Those have not been like proven as like factual. It's more of a guideline. But what I have found personally too is that like you're just always kind of grieving and moving forward. You know, like it doesn't ever just stop where you're like, oh, like I'm good, like we've moved on and it's all great and rosy posy.
Yeah.
You know, like that just doesn't happen. But one of the things that you mentioned specifically I wanted to talk about was the security. And that's what happens a lot when you lose a loved one. And in this scenario where like he was the partner of making my children, you know, like it's like losing that security of that person, and not just like my best friend and the person who knew me best in the world, right? Like we had went through so much together. So our second son, Talon, has cerebral palsy.
Yeah.
When he got diagnosed with that up north, like, I mean, I had one relative and she was super awesome, my cousin, but I mean, she had 6 kids of her own. Like she's trying to do her own thing, you know, like, and that was it. Like we were up north, he had surgery, a selective dorsal rhizotomy, where they like remove bone out of their spine.
Wow.
And like cut nerves off your spine. I mean, it was super invasive surgery, and it was just us up there. You know, like things like that, you know, like that you just experienced just together when his dad passed away.
Yeah.
We were up north, you know, like, so it's like so many things that we had experienced, just us, where like now it's hard because it's like I am the carrier of all of those memories, you know, and it's just me now.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Mm-hmm. And so having that is very, it's just heavy. It can just be very heavy. And so one thing in grief, that they teach you is to find the positive memories, to really focus on like, you know, what you can take with you that he had, and not be like, okay, I'm moving on. Cause I was like, my thing was like, oh my gosh, like how could I ever, I was worried. I'm like, how could I ever forget him? You know, and I didn't want that. It was like this fear, which is normal as I've come to find.
Yeah.
Like, and I didn't realize that, right? I'm just like freaking out, like, oh my gosh, like all of these memories, you know, they start, you know, it's been times passing, they start to fade, you know, and it's like, oh my gosh, I would feel like he's slipping away, and it's like, oh no, how am I, you know, all these things. And so they tell you to just really focus on the positive memories and the things that make you happy when you think about that person. And it's like the restructuring, right? Like you're just restructuring it. It's not that you're forgetting or you're leaving them behind, and like, you know, any negative thing like that I was personally worried about, or things that I was like, oh no, like how is this all going to work out, you know? And that's one thing that's really, really helped me is like my kids, and I talk about him, and it's like, yeah, like my kids, Spencer used to eat crazy hot food.
Yeah.
Like crazy hot. He'd get his saimingi out at ramen noodles, and he's inhaling it right off the boiler, you know, like, and it's like, dude, like, is your mouth not on fire right now? And so my kids talk about that, you know, they're like, yeah, like, or like Talon, just the other day, we were taking a tour of a school and he's like, my dad like could lift up a car, you know, and I was like, it's true. Like,
You literally
saw
can.
that. Yeah. And so just like holding on to that and not being afraid to talk about it, you know, because that's the other thing with grief is like, I feel like a lot of times it does hurt so bad, especially at the beginning, talking about memories and like, and then like for us, like we'd want to talk about them and other people didn't, or they would say like all the wrong things to you when you're like in that process. I mean, they haven't been through it, right? So they don't know what to say or what not to say. Yeah. But to us, it's like, I mean, my kids would tell me like, Mom, you know, like, can you believe this person said this? And like, it hurt me. And I, you know, and I'm sitting here trying to explain to them, you know, like, yeah, I realize, you know, like these people don't know. And so then I'm trying to like bring in like the memories and the good things and talk about them. So it's not this like weird thing or like this super, I mean, obviously it's still super traumatic, you know, if we're obviously being honest. But to reframe it.
A little bit.
Yeah. And to hold on to the good, you know, instead of it being, because that's the other thing. So like the person who did it was actually convicted of 1st-degree murder.
Yeah.
I mean, it was proven, right? Like we don't even need to get into all of that. Yeah, it was proven. He's convicted, right?
A couple of those, yeah.
And that was what was hard for me is I was up north.
Right.
And like I was out of the loop. And honestly, I feel like God knew like this is what Kassandra needs. Like, I mean, I can't even imagine if I was there during all of that. I was already not okay, right? Like in those moments in that whole year, really. But reading about it, I will tell you, is super traumatic, you know? And like, that's the thing that was hard for me is like passing through all of the anger, being angry at him, being angry at the person who did it, being angry at myself, being angry at God, being angry at anyone, right? Yeah. Like it just
anyone you could transfer it to.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And like I'm sitting here trying to make sense of all of this and how do you make sense of that, right? Like there's no sense to be made.
Sure.
It was 1st-degree murder, you know, like no sense to be made. But what I will tell you is it was next level when I talked to that person and looked him in the eye. And it was during COVID, but it honestly made it like a lot more intimate because there was just like a little camera. And I sat directly in front of it. So everyone else was behind me. So I didn't see anything really. And up on a screen was this person. And this person was just in their jail cell. So there was no one around them. It was very intimate. And I had been waiting.
Yeah.
I had been waiting to address this person. And it took me a long time to figure out what to even say, how to even make sense of what I wanted to say. But I did have a lot to say.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing, too, if you hurt me, but to hurt my 4 children, that's where it's like, you know.
Right. Mama Bear comes out.
I mean, I was angry.
Yeah.
I don't even like getting super into that because of how angry I was, but I'm also very accepting of it, you know, like I'm like, okay, let's do this. And so at that moment, that morning, actually, I was freaking out. I was like, holy crap. Like I am going to face not just a murder, but like the person who murdered my best friend.
Yeah. And that brought all these emotions on and onto your kids and onto you and onto his family.
I mean, like next level. Yeah. But one thing that I did want to talk about too, which I was not expecting at all, like I didn't have any plans to say this. So a lot of my statement was very much like, this is who you took from us. And I felt I'm validating myself, like no shame here, you know, like, and this is what it's like to be the mother of the children of the person's father that you took.
Right.
You know? And I mean, you go through like, I want you to feel what I feel type of stuff, you know, like, and so that's kind of what I was trying to convey in all of the things that I was saying, but also doing justice to everyone else. Like I told him, I'm like, you took, you know, like people's best friends and mentors and a son, a brother, an uncle, you know, like just, you just have no clue, basically. But that morning, it was very much by divine design. I'm sitting there trying my very damnedest to wrap my head around this, right? And like at this point, I had had some rapid eye sessions. So I'm doing like way, like, I mean, here I was and like, you know, like just crazy, yeah, better. And so I'm sitting here trying to wrap my head around this, like, how can I honestly do the very best by everyone?
Yeah.
You know, not because that's how I feel. Like, I feel like that's my duty, kind of like to honor Spencer. And so I'm like, how do I do this? And I'm listening to these guided meditations that just randomly pop up on my iTunes.
Huh.
On their own accord.
I don't think it was random.
Right? And I don't believe in coincidences.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's in that moment I was like, what is this? Like, it's playing. And the first one is about courage. And it went all into courage and how in the most intense and heavy situations, how you become courageous and not go into fear. And then the second one that popped up was forgiveness. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
You know,
like any other day, but today
real.
It comes up.
And that was not at all on like my written
didn't
stuff.
cue it. Yeah.
And I mean, like, I didn't write that on my, like I had no plans to speak to this person about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Zero at this point. And that's one thing about me is I am a very, very forgiving person. Like I feel like there is nothing that we can't work out or talk about, like if we're willing to, right?
Sure.
And so this comes up, and like the way the words in this were like literally perfect. I mean, this person talked about how when you forgive, like you're not condoning what they have done. Like you're literally giving them that like toxic. So like, fun fact, they have done tests on people when they're extremely angry, and they have injected that into like rats, and it kills them.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Like that's how toxic.
I could understand that. Yeah.
Right. And so like, I mean, it's so toxic for our bodies to operate with that much anger and just all of those emotions and chemical reactions that our body goes through in that moment. And I mean, she's literally talking about all of these ways how it's not like saying anything what you did was okay. It's like, I need this forgiveness for me and my family. And like, it has nothing to do with you. Like, you go on your way. Like, I'm basically separating this and like letting you go do your thing and however you need to navigate this, and I'm navigating over here. And I told him that. And I said a lot of other things before that. And I was like, I felt all of my feelings in that moment. I was sobbing. I was yelling. I was like, yeah, you know, like I was just letting it all out because I'm like, I have waited for this, you know, like I can be a very confrontational person. And because to me, confrontation equals resolution, you know, and so I'm like, let's resolve this.
Okay.
And I did in that moment. I told him, I was like, not because anything you did is acceptable, even remotely. You know, this is for me and my family, and we, with Spencer, are going to move forward. And what you do is up to you and God, you know, like, and that was it. And that was so powerful for me. I mean, just huge for me to like walk out of there that day. And did it just solve everything and make it go away? No. Right. But like, the fact that I handed that back to this person, I mean, it was just insurmountable, huge.
That's amazing. I couldn't imagine having to go through that. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
How long do you think that the grief lasted for you?
So that's one thing that's interesting, even coming from like a psychology standpoint, is actually like studies have shown that grief doesn't ever really end or go away. It just transforms and changes. And that's one thing I've noticed that's been hard for me is like, you know, I'll think I'm doing so well, and not just, this is my frame of mind in this point. Like, I really am actually doing really well. But in that moment when it happens and you're re-upset or re-angry or whatever it is, usually for the most part, I feel like because of that, the anger has gone away for me.
Okay.
It's more just the sadness and the weight of it and just missing my best friend, you know, like not even, it's just as simple as that. And then to talk to somebody about all of these things with my kids,
Yeah.
right? Like the person who knows.
Well, I bet it's weird for them to like have all of I mean, there's got to be thousands and thousands and thousands of people that Spencer touched.
Oh yeah. I mean,
That's got to be crazy for them to like have, I mean, they knew their dad, don't get me wrong.
Right.
But like, they're going to hear all of these stories their whole life of who their dad was for all these people. I mean, I think that's amazing.
Oh,
I mean,
totally. Well, and that's what it's like. I want that, you know, like I have really encouraged everybody around us to just like, I mean, I take the initiative to go take them to his friends and his family and, you know, my friends, my family, right? Like,
yeah.
and I'm like, so that we can talk about it. And it's not this like, again, this, because we grieve together. Like
Yeah.
that's the other thing is like, we got to share these things and connect. And when we start to back away, which I did myself for quite a while when I was so hurt, it's like, man, I just don't want to talk to anyone. Everyone's saying all the wrong things, you know, and you're in that place and that's okay. No shame. Like you got to figure it out, but it has to start somewhere, right? Like you have to, reach out, but it takes time to get to that place.
So with them, you're a lot more open about it. Like you would rather people come and talk to them.
Oh, totally.
So it's not even like shielding them from what happened. They're well aware.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the better way to do it.
Yeah.
Let them deal with those emotions instead of either blowing up down the road or bottling that up. And, right.
Well, and that's what's interesting too, is I even told them, my older kids, the boys, because I mean, the girls, it's like they can't even really, you know, they don't really understand a lot. But that'll come with time. Like
Sure.
I'm, you know, I'm open to that. But I told them, I said, I want you to know that I looked that person in the eye and I told them what they did was wrong. And I told them, I will read to you what I said if you would like, you know, so that they know that I'm sticking up for them, I'm rooting for them, and at the same time, like, we are moving through this, you know, like, we're not going to bottle it up. We're not going to just, and having experienced tons of trauma myself, right? Like, I went through tons of childhood trauma. Like I said, I was in trauma therapy for 3 years working on all of that. And like, multiple traumas. Like there's a ACE childhood test score, right? And it goes to 10. I didn't know this at the time. My trauma therapist was like, here's a test. Like, I want you to fill this out. And I do the test and he's like, so what'd you get? And I was like, a 10.
You're
know,
like,
I'm
yay.
like 10, right? The only time I ever got a 10. And he's like, that's as high as it goes. Like, it doesn't go higher. And here I am in my adult life experiencing like these traumas.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it's not like my son was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. He had these surgeries and like that. So come to find out, so trauma can be described. Trauma is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. That's all it's classified. And then when you go back, so like the Greek word for a trauma is wound.
Huh.
So like, that's what's interesting is I've come to find talking about this with people is, trauma is whatever your body and your mind feels as trauma. Like, it's not something that we're like, oh, it, you know, Derick experienced this experience and he didn't get traumatized by it, so I'm not traumatized by it. Right? Like, meanwhile, I'm like freaking out over here, or whatever it is, right? Like experiencing something and I'm trying to dismiss it. And like, that's what we do as humans a lot of time, especially based on the culture we live in, you know, like the shame factor, and people just don't like talking about it, you know, and it is coming out more and people are talking about it more. But like, also, how do you know these things if you don't know these things?
Yeah.
You know, like, you're not exposed to it. You're not around it. If you're not like me and like to like read psychology on the side, like, you're not going to know. Right. And so many times we dismiss what trauma actually is. And I even did that myself, even knowing what trauma is. And so I'm a level 10, right? And then I have all these other experiences. And then that just was like, you know, I mean, the icing on the cake, we could say, right? Like, it was just like, it capped it for me. It was like, wow. And it threw me in a whole nother whirlwind. And even my therapist, like, he was like, this is nuts. Like, he's like, a lot of humans don't go through a lot of this, right? Like
For
we hear
sure.
about crazy experiences, but he was just like, this is crazy. And so to be able to go through all of that and be where I'm at now, which is why I reached out to you.
Yeah.
Because it's like, if we don't talk about this, if we don't talk about the healing that can occur and talk about these things that every single human on the planet is dealing with, especially right now in a pandemic. I mean, like, hello, that's trauma, right?
Right.
Like, we're all experiencing this trauma. And if we're not navigating through it and we're trying to just like, I mean, if you don't know about mental health and about multiple healing modalities that are out there, like, you're not going to know what to do. You're just going to think that there's either something wrong with you because that's what you're told or that's what you hear or that's what your just body naturally is like, something's wrong with you, then that's what you're going to take on. And then a lot of times you're not going to tell anybody.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think that's how I guess I'll only speak for me, but like, I feel like our generation, that's how we were brought up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't talk about those things.
Yeah.
But not even that it's our parents' fault or anything, but that was just the culture that it was in. Everything you're talking about like fascinates me because like I'm not educated in any of this, but it always interests me how people work and how people react to things and people's personalities. And like if I was into the whole book thing more, I think that's what I would have done.
Right.
My wife, I'll sit with my wife and I'm a people watcher. And so
totally.
I'll see things that go on and I'll be like, this guy's going to do this. Or like we'll be in a conversation at a restaurant and my mind just drifts off into what these people are talking about,
Like you're overhearing it and you're like, oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah.
And then I'm like, now he's going to do this and he's going to say that. And you're like driving. I'm always predicting what people are going to do.
Yeah.
And just the habits of it, how it's formed and how personalities are formed have always interested me.
That's cool.
But I think, that's one thing, but what you guys are doing, being able to process that and being open to it and being, like think about your kids, like this could have been 180 for them if you would have just freaked out, know, and not had some kind of control and thought process about how to not only break the news to them, but how to transition it to today. Right.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because that's actually when I did decide to go with Rapid Eye, my biggest motivator was like, I need to do this for my kids.
Yeah.
I saw how it helped me and I got to do this for them. And then it'll just be like reap the benefits because, this can now become what I've always wanted to do anyways. And like utilize this as a tool toward my career. But like that wasn't even my first go-to at all. It's like, this is for them. Yeah. And I think it does. It just starts with talking about it like this. Yeah. Right. Talking about it. Cause in Rapid Eye, what we've learned is super cool too. Like the learning system, like you start out by not knowing that you don't know something. Right. Sure. And then once you acknowledge that you don't know, you don't know, then things can start to shift. And it's just like driving a car, right? Like a baby does not know that they don't know how to drive a car, right? And it just takes practice and it takes time. It takes awareness. It takes you choosing to develop skills. And like, that's why I love mental health so much is because it's like, I find it so interesting because it's like we all need it. Yeah. There's
like nobody that doesn't need it.
Right. And like you like business. Yeah. Sure. Right? Like, it's like, okay,
it's a big part of my life.
Right? And so, like, it's like you chose to kind of go that path, but you still need to have these skills. Yeah. Right? Like, it's like, it just is so fundamental. And so some things that I've always wondered is like, why don't we talk about this in school? And some are actually, some schools back east, and like different Montessori schools and stuff, that's not necessarily public where it's just been this way over time. Like they have the different brainstorming power to figure out these kinds of things. And even in different countries, like actually it's like a lot more common in different countries, to like, Eastern, right? Like Eastern and Western philosophy and medicine. There's a lot of that. Like we have a lot of the medicine in the Western.
Yeah.
Where Eastern, like you get talking about your chakras and like that's like fundamental to them. And it existed all before what we have. And so it's like, why don't we utilize all of that? And that's what I love doing, is combining it.
Okay.
Like taking all of the resources, taking all of the information, instead of just being like, no, it's just this one way, and no, it's just this one way. Like, let's combine that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I love about Rapid Eyes. They totally do that. They're just combining the science and everything that you have to utilize. And then you have more knowledge, you have more tools to utilize, you know, like it's not just one or two things. And that's the other thing, is like there are so many different healing modalities out there that we don't even, I mean, I didn't know about. Yeah. Like I didn't know Rapid Eye existed, right? Like
I hadn't heard about it until you.
Right. And like that's one thing that is exciting for me, but also like part of my mission, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, is like creating awareness toward not just Rapid Eye technology, but just like, hey, because I'm like, for the greater good. Like let's just get everybody talking about this. Like we all, as a human race, like are in a traumatic situation right now. We all need to know how to cope through all of this. That's a huge part of why we're seeing riots happen and all of this fighting. Like people are using that as their outlet, for their aggression of being kept inside and not knowing what in the heck is going on in the real world.
Yeah, being consistently, I mean, I would say consistently lied to, but
right,
not having the correct information all the time.
Right. Well, and like I feel like we don't even know who to trust right now. Yeah, like it's like like we're told the media, and then you hear this and you hear that, and it's just like, man, like you're just spun around.
Yeah, these doctors telling these doctors they're wrong, and these influential people telling these them. Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, and then you get into politics, and it's like, oh great, like like there went that. And that's how I feel like it is a lot right now. Like it's just, and it shows though. Like it shows because of the trauma that everybody's experienced. It's funny because like, I mean, hashtag funny, not funny. But up north when I was working, and like when you go through a lot of trauma, like, and then trauma happens, like it's not super, like I'm very adaptable now. So like I was kind of like, yeah, okay, cool. I can go to the grocery store and there's not going to be anyone there. Yeah. Like I realized something was actually happening in the world, but like I operate out of a lot of trauma. Like it's just, and I feel like my life has been designed this way, because if not, then there is no way that I could have ever went through this stuff that we just talked about with Spencer.
I was going to touch on that. I was going to say, I think a lot of your past, for better or worse.
Oh, totally. And it depends on how you look at it, right?
Yeah. But, yeah, anyway, I cut people off when I'm trying to get over that.
You're fine. No. And like, yeah, I love to talk. So, but it's just, when you're used to being traumatized, you have just like these coping skills and this way of going through it. And so I was just kind of like, oh, like everybody else is freaking out. Like I'm okay over here.
Yeah.
You know,
I went
like
about my day.
Right.
I ain't changed a thing.
Right. And it was just like, okay, like, but so like my point was, one day at work, I was saying like, when I become a therapist or whatever it is that I do, but I knew I wanted to do something like that.
Yeah.
I said, it'll be really interesting talking about people and their obsession with toilet paper.
Yeah.
And like how that all went about, like, because it was nuts, right?
It was nuts.
Like
I had buddies calling me and they're like, dude, I'm running to the store. Do you guys need any toilet paper? I'm like, what?
And that's the thing, is like everybody just kind of like, everybody just reacted.
Yeah.
Like unless you have skills, or you talked about, like you already have been interested in this. So you already kind of knew, like, when I'm freaking out, like let's take that, put that over here, and then I want this instead. So I'm going to put that there and try and keep, taking it as I go and keep, And I think a lot of people who just have no idea and never have known how to do that, I mean, they can't be expected to just know.
Right.
Right?
I mean, as a younger kid, that's how I was. I was very reactionary to a lot of things.
Right.
And the examples that I had around me was usually like anger, right?
See, right? Like
and
it
so
always
that's what I
stems from
tied
somewhere.
to everything. And so maybe the last 8 or 10 years, I've I've kind of been opened up into the idea of those feelings and those emotions that you have, you can actually control those.
Right.
You know, like
Right.
I never even thought of that before.
Right. And most people don't.
Yeah. And so I've tried to do that a lot more, especially being married. Like my wife has rarely seen that side. I mean, maybe twice in 10 years. And I've like the Joe Dispenza thing like that. It really, I've listened to a lot of his talks because he talks a lot about that.
That's
and
huge,
then
yeah.
a lot of the business stuff, like you have to, like if you're reactionary to everything, I mean, good luck.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I mean, there's times that I'm fired up about things and
Right.
you just kind of have to see that coming down the wire and
Yep.
and replace that with something else.
Right.
And you hope that by the third time that one's not there anymore.
Right. Or it'll
you know?
start to not be so fiery.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You kind of start processing everything more, taking a second and not being reactionary.
Well, and that's literally, so our brains like you can change them. Like you're never stuck in something.
Yeah.
Like neuroplasticity, that's what that means. Like you can literally rewire your brain. But if you don't know that and you're taking this Myers and Briggs test or somebody tells you, you're always going to be this way.
Yeah.
You know, like, and then you believe it and your subconscious attaches itself to that. And not to mention, like, you're this whole soul here and that can't get damaged. And so then it creates that shell over it. And it's like, I got to protect this.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's making me think about a lot of people that I know and even my father of being like, what were those things that were about to get exposed or touched on or talked about when it went, you know,
Right.
and that shell got hit and had to protect what was in there.
Yeah.
I've never heard it explained like
Well,
that.
and like a lot of it could be from childhood and
Sure.
they don't even know.
I'm sure most of it was for
right?
him.
And
yeah.
like they could not even know. And that's what's so interesting to me too, is because it's like when we take away the shame factor and we take away this huge, like, you did this and now you feel shame and you're a bad person.
Yeah.
Like that, again, that's going to be like, whoop,
Right.
shell, like
Protection.
can't damage this. Yeah. Right. It's natural. You don't even know you're doing it. Your body naturally just does it, which is amazing.
Yeah. Don't like
it's
that
protecting
feeling.
it. Yeah. It's protecting itself. But if you're not aware that's happening, I mean, shell upon shell upon shell, you know, I mean, it could go on for so long if you're not aware. And so when we can just create that awareness and take away the shame factor, it's like, man, think of, like, you used your dad, for instance. It's like, think about what could have happened for him.
Yeah.
Right. And like, or other people, you know, like, and I think that's what a huge part of my message is too. It's like, hey, these people, I have been totally victimized, right? Like, we could call it that. I don't look at myself as a victim at all. But I mean, like, when you've been sexually abused. Other people might have seen you
that way.
Right.
Sure.
Well, like, and for instance, sexual abuse, like, that's a huge one where people feel very victimized.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I was definitely victimized, right? Am I a victim right now? Hell no.
Right.
But was I, like, looked at that? Was I victimized? Yes. And so, like, it's like, okay, that, you know, like, creating that, and then to be able to say, hey, this person who victimized me was probably victimized themselves. Like, no person is just going to go out and do something like that. They're just not, right? Like, you don't just go do that, or you don't just go kill someone, right? Like, there is reasons for this, and it's backed up by science. It's backed up. It really is. Like, it's like these people have experienced things that have detached them from reality or from whatever it is, right? And so they react in crazy ways. And if we're able to take away that shame factor and give that person the opportunity to be 100% accountable for what they did, think about how that could transform everything. Right?
Yeah.
Like, you're giving them the opportunity. And actually, so like, my victimizer was actually a teacher of mine. And I reported that teacher and I addressed him in court. And one of the things I said to him was like, you know what? Like, now I hope your sickness, like, you can get help for that.
Yeah.
Right? So you stop in this pattern that you've been like facilitating in this sickness, right? That you can go change now and address yourself. And like, I'm not kidding. Like, it's like, man, I can't even imagine what that will look like for you to have to look yourself in the mirror and be like, I did these things. But that's when the change happens.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I love about Rapid Eye too, is we talk about principles and skills that like kind of govern human nature and life. Thought, perception, choice and accountability, cause and effect, health and healing, and harmony and rhythm. And when you go to the very first place of your thoughts and start to change that, and then start to change your perception, instead of like, I'm a victim, or I have to do this because this was done to me, or compartmentalizing it in whatever way. And then you start to take accountability for it and own it. And then you realize that when you can own that, no matter how hard it is, that's when everything starts to change for you. The cause and effect. Then you have abundance and gratitude. The healing comes in, and then you have harmony in your life, you know? And so it's like teaching you that no matter how that happened, it's worth it. It's worth it to go through those steps, you know?
Yeah. Since you've been through that, can you maybe give us, or listeners, a couple tools, maybe something? Because I mean, there's a lot of people that have been sexually abused, I would imagine, that have never talked about it.
Right.
Maybe because you've worked through that and you've been through that, can you give us a couple things to help someone that's maybe been there in their lives and they're trying to figure out what to do?
Yeah. So first thing first is, it was not your fault. No matter what happened, it was not your fault. Like, no matter, you know, like, what happens often in sexual abuse is like, you exposed yourself, you allowed yourself to be in those positions, no matter how young you were, right? Like, for me, my victimizer was nice to me and treated me with like love and kindness, right? Like to face value.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking bad guy, like, you know, it's like my brain didn't understand, like, well, a bad guy is someone who's like, hey, you come here, I'm going to steal you, or whatever, right?
Manipulate it a little bit.
Right. Oh, like, and that's the thing with sexual abuse, is it's so manipulated almost always.
Sure.
And it's not just women either. It's 1 in 4 in Utah.
1 in 4 guys?
1 in 4 in general.
Oh, in general, guys or girls? Wow.
1 in 4. Like, that statistic is not okay.
Yeah.
You know? But the main thing I would say, first of all, is like, no matter how it happened and no matter what your brain is telling you, that you put yourself in that position, you, whatever, if your body reacted to a way that you thought that you enjoyed it, because your body naturally reacts, you don't control it. Right?
Yeah.
And like, science tells us that kids don't have a break when it comes to sexual things. They only have the gas.
Yeah.
So like, they don't understand.
It's like pleasure, more pleasure.
Right. Like they're just built that way. Yeah. Like, it's to no fault of their own. And so just taking away that huge shame factor is just gigantic. I mean, it just is so huge. And then also, I think another thing that I would say is, and this is a little bit more difficult, because it's like, when you're in that frame of mind, you know, I'm thinking when I was in that very first frame of mind, and for years and years and years, it's okay to talk about it. And it does come with time. Like, that's the other thing, is like, don't rush it. It's okay. But like, I guess the other thing I would really focus on is, it's okay to like get the help you need. Like, it's okay to, even if it starts out with you reading things yourself.
Yeah.
Instead of like thinking just like, okay, I don't like these feelings. And I think that's what happens a lot with sexual abuse, is it's like, you don't like those feelings that come in when you start thinking about it. And so then you create all these other ways, like you avoid it. But that's like the ultimate thing, is just like avoiding it. So
Put
you
a
just
shell.
Pull out. Exactly.
I love your shell analogy.
Right?
I'm going to use that in my life.
Right? It's so true though.
I know. I just never thought about it that way.
I love it too. But, yeah, I think just basically starting to create that awareness in yourself, you know, that you are experiencing these things and this did happen to you and it wasn't your fault, and it's okay to get the help that you need.
Okay.
And just kind of going from there. One thing that I love in Rapid Eye that we teach, and I have definitely done this myself, is anytime you have any kind of negative thought creep in, this is not just for sexual abuse. This is for every type of anything, any trauma, any negative thought that comes in that you don't like. You literally just tell yourself, I would say, I love you, Kassandra. I love you, Kassandra. I love you, Kassandra. Over and over and over. And they can't be there at the same time.
So that gratitude and that negative thought would combat each other.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it not even combat. When there's light, the darkness, it's gone.
It's gone.
Mm-hmm. Huh. Yeah. And so it's like there, like you, I love you, Kassandra. And as long as I'm saying that, and not to mention I'm literally rewiring my brain at that point, because I'm choosing something different. Mm-hmm. And then there's like, you know, going along with choice and accountability, like I'm being accountable for that thought that I had, and I felt it and I experienced it. So now I'm going to choose something else, right? I'm being accountable. I'm choosing. So then comes in like the other good feelings, the, you know, like the gratitude. I'm grateful for myself because I chose that, even if it's on a subconscious level. Mm-hmm. I'm not consciously like, oh, good job, Kassandra. You know, like you took that to your own self and now you're taking those steps, you know. It's like, no, it's honored in your body's own natural system. And so as simply as just saying, like, you're triggered, start saying, I love you to yourself and say your name. And another powerful thing is you can look yourself in the mirror and in the eye and do it and go back and forth between each eye, or even I forgive you. I forgive you for allowing yourself to be sexually molested. And then it's not your fault. Because that's a lot of times we think we allowed ourselves to be in that position.
I shouldn't have put myself there. I shouldn't have allowed it. I shouldn't have been in that. Yeah.
Exactly. And so and it doesn't have to just be sexual abuse, right? It can be lots of things. I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have done that.
Physical abuse, anything. Mental abuse, any of it.
Right. And so when you start to forgive yourself, even if it sounds weird, that's the other thing, is we kind of have to look at forgiveness differently. Because it's like, well, he abused me, so like I shouldn't have to be going through this.
Yeah.
But forgiving it is like, no, it's not, like I said before. It's not like that. It's not like what you did is okay. It's like, no. Like that's not what we're doing here. Like go look up forgiveness. Google it. Like what does forgiveness actually mean? And it will pull up article upon article upon article about how it has nothing to do with telling that other person that what they did is okay. And so restructuring it in our own mind, right, is like, it can be a semantic based on what we know as forgiveness. And so it's like, okay, I forgive myself for allowing myself to be in this position, or choosing this or not choosing this, whatever it is, and look at yourself in the mirror and do that and just see what it does for you. And the other thing that I would suggest is just be aware of your breathing. Being aware of your breathing, and anytime you're in a situation, just tell yourself to just breathe. And so like if you take in a breath for like 4 counts, like, and you hold it for 3 and you let it out for like 7, you can try it. Do it. I'll do it. So in, hold, and then out for 7. How do you feel?
I feel more relaxed.
Right? And like I feel it in my frontal lobe. Like what it does is it gives your brain more oxygen. And so there's definitely different breathing techniques that you can do that we're just not taught.
Yeah.
Even tapping, like when you tap different pressure points, it releases that in your body. Because again, your body keeps the score. You know, I mean, it's science. It's not any like weird
voodoo.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's exactly especially in the Western, like we're not taught these things. We just know medicine and doctors.
Yeah.
And even that, so many of them are just set up to put a Band-Aid over it. And they don't even know half the time. And that's a huge part, is like, sometimes we can't even really blame it on them, because it's like, man, they don't even know.
Yeah.
They don't even know that what they're doing is wrong, and that they're not giving us all this information. That's just what they know and what they're taught. And so it's up to us to take it upon ourselves for our own lives and figure that out. But again, if we don't know, we don't know. And so that's one thing that I just love so much. And I feel very like experienced all of the things that I have experienced, is why I'm here, why I'm on this earth, what my mission is, you know, is to just kind of talk about these things, spread the awareness, ask the questions, get into that vulnerability, and be willing to talk about the nitty gritty hard topics, you know, that a lot of people don't, or aren't accustomed to talking about, and just show them like, hey, this is okay. Like we can talk about this, because Derick, like everyone else is experiencing these things too.
Well, and that's what we've really tried to build the podcast around is come in, be vulnerable, tell us what's going on. I mean, you're going to have multiple things. And I hope that you're open to people reaching out to you.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. With even just questions.
Right. Because you've been through a lot, and touching on the breathing thing, it's funny because I was always told when I was doing sports growing up, whether you're getting ready to throw the pitch or shoot a free throw or whatever it was, like take a breath, right? But I never had to explain to me any of it.
Right.
But I don't know if you noticed right before we started.
I did, yeah. I did. I noticed that exact thing.
I like took a breath, just kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. I mean, I'm still nervous doing this, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's fun for me, but I still have nerves when we start, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to tell myself it's more excitement that it is nervous.
And that totally works too.
Yeah.
Because like 9 times out of 10, it really is just excitement. We just aren't even like chemically aware. It's like, oh, I'm feeling feelings. Like, what is this?
Well,
yeah.
I had heard once, and I did a little bit of research on it, that excitement and nervousness are your brain can't tell the difference.
It's us that put our perception and our thoughts behind it.
Sure. Isn't that so? Wouldn't it be amazing? I'm kind of weird on split tests. I always want to split test things with like humans. I'm not like a Nazi, like doing weird things.
Yeah.
I'm like,
You just want to know.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I was brought up being nervous to fail and nervous to this and little more of the negative side of it. And then take a kid that it's like skydiving is an excitement, you know, bungee jumping's excitement, shooting the last shot at the game's excitement, and having instead of being nervous through all of it, I wonder like where that person would be is instilling that positive chemical that's going into them instead of negative chemicals. I don't know. It's always been interesting to me.
So like it's a huge part of like what we experience. So nature versus nurture, it's actually both. I don't know if you've heard that term.
Yeah.
So it's both. Like it's definitely nature and nurture. A lot of like, so epigenetics. Are you familiar with that?
I don't even know how to say that word.
Epigenetic. No.
Epigenetics.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us about epigenetics?
Okay, I will. So it's super fascinating to me. They did a test. They traumatized mice. Okay. They traumatized these mice.
Why is everything with mice?
I know. Well, because I guess people are like, it's a rodent.
Just kill them off if they die.
Its life doesn't matter. Yeah.
Sorry, go
not
ahead.
Cool, but whatever. And so they did this test with mice. And what they discovered is 5 generations down the road, these mice were still having effects that they did on the traumatized mice.
Really?
5 generations. And I've thought, we learned that in rapid eye neuroscience. And I've thought a lot about that. So my grandma is straight from Germany, and she was there definitely like right all in the mix of Hitler and World War II. And, I mean, thinking, so that's just my mom and then her. And then thinking like, 5 generations.
Your
it's
kids,
like,
their kids.
Right. Their kids, my great, you're right. Like, it's just amazing to think that we are still dealing with those ramifications, and like once we're aware, like, that's where the magic, the power is, right? Like we can start to change. But if we don't know and we're just operating out of that, if we, have issues with food because of the Great Depression, how many Americans have issues with food?
Most.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a huge thing. And it does stem back to a lot of like, they're making unhealthy food, right?
Sure.
Like, yeah, shocker.
Right.
Hopefully not. But attachments to food, like think about
Your
that.
emotional attachments to it. Yeah.
And like feeling like you have to satisfy this hunger or, like, is it because your family didn't have enough? Right? Like, or like, what if they had food and you didn't know when you were going to get the next food? And so you engorged yourself, you overate, and you're not even necessarily sure like that why this is happening. You're just reacting. Right. Or like, maybe you are aware, but like you're blaming yourself and you start shaming yourself. Right. Like, those negative thoughts come in because of what you've experienced or what your family experienced, you know, and like if your mom and dad or your coach or your teacher, or it could be anyone, isn't aware of like these things, and they're just like, why are you eating so much? You know, like, yeah, you should not be eating so much.
Yeah,
and they
chew
start
your food
saying
a little more.
right.
Yeah.
And they start saying all those kinds of things to you. And it's like, man, they don't realize what they're doing either, you know, and then your brain's gathering that evidence in, and it's like, oh, let's back that up. You know, like it's gathering that in as like information to prove that point over here, you know, and that happens a lot. Like when you're going through something, your brain, it's gathering the evidence, and unless you start to be like, hey, no, like that's actually not true.
I mean, is that like a survival thing, or why do you think it does that?
Which part?
Where your brain's taking information, and then your emotions, everything start adapting to it.
It's just, that's how our brain works.
That's just how it works.
Mm-hmm. It just takes in the information. Again, it doesn't know the difference between positive and negative.
I guess that's true.
Right. And so then if you have had this experience, it's just redoing that experience. It's like, oh, let's gather the evidence to prove that point. And it can be positive too, right?
Yeah.
Like it can be like, oh, this person shows their love to me this way. So that means this person's loving me when they give me a hug or when they hand me flowers or whatever it is, right? Like it doesn't always have to be negative.
Just whatever it's tied to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you've opened my mind to a lot of different things today.
That makes me happy.
Let me ask you this. I heard this a week ago.
Okay.
And so I've really been working on it this a week. Trying to, when those negative thoughts come up or those negative emotions come up,
mm-hmm.
trying to tie it to a positive emotion or a positive emotion for that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And let me side note this. Do you think that, like, I don't know if anger is the right word, but do you think that like being mad or anger is a negative emotion?
Mm-mm. So I would say like you definitely need to feel your feelings. So feel it first, acknowledge, because you don't want to invalidate yourself and be like, oh, I'm a negative person because I'm angry. I mean, it's a human emotion.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're all going to experience that. And a lot of times our brain just does it. Like it's just going to react. You don't mean for it. You're not like, I'm going to choose to be angry right now.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like it just does it.
Well, so what if you rewrite something with being angry though?
So then what do you mean? Like,
so this is my example. This is what I went through.
Okay.
So I'm very competitive when I'm angry.
Okay.
And so without going into it, I just had some business stuff come up that I needed to perform better. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And so when that came up, I had this thought of, okay, so what do I tie this to? And I thought, well, if I want to be competitive and overcome this and win, if that's the word you want to put to it, then I need to be like controlled angry, right? Like I need to tie anger to that so I can beat it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so then I had the thought, well, is that working backwards? Like is that a negative emotion in this state?
I mean, it's up to you, honestly. Like that's what I would say from what I've learned is like, do you tie anger to a negative thing? Are you being like, what does the anger look like? Right? Like, because it could also be a semantic.
Yeah.
Like it depends on what you define as anger. A lot of people I've found is like, they don't like calling things certain things because it's like, oh, well, I wasn't angry. I was upset. Excuse me. Or I wasn't angry. I was passionate.
Okay.
I've heard that. So like I would say if you're being aggressive or you're being
aggressive's a better word than angry.
Okay.
Aggressive.
Okay. So like if describe to me more, like what does that look like?
You won't outwork me. I'm just on the attack. I'm pushing forward. I'm gaining more ground. If that's a good way to say it.
So I would say like if you are doing it in a healthy way, like where you're okay with whatever the outcome is, as long as you're willing to know, like, because it's different when you're like, I'm going to do this because I'm that way. Yeah. I'll be like, nothing can stop me from overcoming this. But it's not like I'm better than them. and I have to beat this one person. It's like, I'm going to do this because Kassandra wants this.
Okay.
Right? So that's where I would say, like, that's where it's more in the healthy range instead of like negative or positive. And again, it's up to you. Like, if you are feeling this dis-ease in your body where you don't know and you're like wondering, that's usually a sign of like there's something that's incongruent for you.
Yeah.
So there's something about it that you're doing or reacting in it that you don't like, that you're not comfortable with. So I would figure that out. Like, what part of this is it? Because I'm being competitive to this like this person, no matter who they are or whatever it is, or is it because like, right, like it stems from something, and then reframing that to be more about you.
Okay.
Where it's like, it has nothing to do with anyone over here. It's all about me and why I want to have this drive, right?
Sure.
Instead of like making it about this other person.
Yeah, it's not like competing. It's more like
exactly. It's competing against
forward.
your own self, basically,
sure, yeah.
right? Instead
Comparing
of someone else. Yes, and that's something that happens so much in just living. Is like we compare everything.
I think it's society.
Everything, yeah.
I think society does that for us a lot of times.
Right, exactly. And so then we do it naturally, right? Like we don't even realize half the time we're doing. It's like, oh man, like I wonder what it would be like to have this or to have that, instead of being like, hey, you know what? I see that person and I see what they have and they seem like they got it. I want that.
Yeah.
Right? Like whatever it is, I want that for me because I want to be happy.
Sure.
Instead of like, I want that because I want to be better than them.
Right.
Right?
I want to get a nicer boat.
Right,
nicer
right.
truck.
So then people can look at me differently,
Yeah.
and then that's the other thing too, that's a very dangerous game, because what happens when you do that, and we all do it, right? Like I've definitely done this myself. When we do that, what happens is, what if that boat goes away?
Right.
And you're left there feeling like nothing.
Yeah.
Because that thing left. And so when you realize, like, I'm still this good whole person over here and I'm doing me, it's like, oh, that boat left. That's fine. I'm going to figure out another way to get a better boat than that because that's what I want. Right. Or like restructure it. Yeah. Like maybe it's like, well, that's cool. I don't even want the boat anymore. Right. Like however you look at it, however you're feeling about it, it doesn't have to be like bigger, better always. Right.
Yeah.
But it's only about you. And you doing better. And that's the thing that I love too. It's like in society, we just compare and we have to be better and bigger. But if we all just break it down, every single one of us has something that no one else has. And so if we tap into that potential and focus on that, like that's like, it's like celebrating each other.
Yeah.
Like you have something that I could never do. Like whoever, Joe Schmo down the block, like they have value, something that I could never do.
I can't read textbooks unless there's a lot of pictures.
You want picture books? Yeah. I'll create one for you.
How many pictures are in there?
Yeah, and even then, right? Like cap at 20.
Yeah, don't even put a description on it. Just let me look at the picture.
Figure it out. Yeah, but that's exactly like with society. Like think how much better, right? Like envision that for a second. It's like, man, how much better could our community even be? If we're all just toward everyone's growth instead of comparing and trying to grab each other down and just build each other up, like boom, like it just, the possibilities are endless. And so that's again what I love, why I love speaking, why I love talking about these things, because it's like, hey, we're all experiencing these things. We all have something to offer. Let's go for it. Let's bring each other up. Let's talk about it, figure out what it is, and keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I've been trying to do this last week is assign these things, but my goal's been pick 5 emotions that I want to tie to different situations or memories. And what does that emotional home look like? Right. Mm-hmm. And so, and that was my struggle, was with anger or with aggression, if we want to call it that. Yeah. Is that something that is a good thing and should be a part of your emotional home? And I think for me it is, because that pushes me a lot. I actually had this conversation with my brother, Adam.
Oh, really?
I don't know, 2 months ago, let's call it. We were talking about people we listen to, and I listened to Andy Frisella and David Goggins and these guys that pump you up, and maybe they're throwing some F words in, or maybe they're calling you a piece of shit, you know, like go do this stuff. And that gets me jacked, you know? And that's like, yeah, you're right. I can do this and I am going to accomplish this. Adam, opposite. He doesn't want to be told any of that.
Yeah.
He wants encouragement. He wants it. And so we were talking about this and I thought, why am I that way? Well, like we've been doing, like go back to your childhood. Well, I had 3 older brothers telling me I sucked at everything. And so like, that's the drive that I always had was like, I'm not as good as them. And our whole lives when we were kids were based around sports.
Right.
I mean, all of us were.
Yeah.
And so it was always like, he can throw the ball further. He can run faster. He can hit faster, you know, hit better. And so I think that drive comes from whether it's good or bad. I mean, I've yet to figure that out. I mean, I feel pretty good with where I'm at 32, you know?
Yeah.
And going back to that, I've tried to figure out, okay, I have these multiple emotions a day with being married, having a kid, running 3 businesses, having 5 employees, podcast a week, you know, and I try to do like a lunch or 2 a week with someone new and kind of network a little bit.
Right.
And just balancing all of these things that you're taking in and all these different situations you're taking in. And when there is a negative or something that makes me, I want to say something that makes me like fall behind.
You feel that way.
Yeah.
You feel
like I'm
you're
not pressing
falling
forward.
Okay.
I'm not growing. When I have those feelings.
I would argue what that feeling, like what it was that caused you to feel that way.
Yeah. Well,
like inside yourself. That's what I would be doing.
And so I would find those things and be like, okay, what triggered that or what made me feel that way? And then that's where I come up with my 5 emotions and try and tie it to that. And then, because I know it's going to take 3, 4, 10 times to come up and try and retie that to it and turn my perspective into being more positive or more aggressive or moving forward or however you want to put it. I don't know. I mean, so give me.
Yeah. So I'm thinking like a lot of times what we do too as humans is we use only what we know.
Sure.
And so like, what if it was something totally different than aggression? Like, what do you want it to be? Does it have to be aggression? Right. Like, and I would argue like to go back to those incidences and be like, hey, what if I like, so a lot of times what you can do, I've done this in trauma therapy and in Rapid Eye. What you can do is go back to that place and have your higher self, which is like who you are now, or even envision yourself like down the road and be like, okay, like my highest self is here with myself then. And what would I tell myself then in that moment? Would I be like, hey, push through this anger and use that? Or would I be like, hey, you know what? Like, you don't even have to compete here. Like, you don't.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is just a game that everybody's kind of caught up in right now. And it doesn't have to be this way. Like, what is it that you actually needed in that moment and to fill that need? And then you can go as, so like for me, just throwing it out there. So like what I did in trauma therapy, because I am religious and I am spiritual, it was like, okay, what would God tell me in that moment? What would he tell me? Would he be like, hey, you know what, Kassandra, like, you don't need to play this game? Or for me, you know, like, it's like, okay, in this moment, what is it that I actually needed? Did I need love? Did I need security? Did I need somebody to be like, you're enough with just who you are? Like, you're different than these people for a reason.
Yeah, maybe don't change that one.
Yeah, and it's like, you have something that these other people don't have. And so you don't even need to compete in this. You know what I mean? So it's almost like being like, hey, you guys can compete and I'll compete for fun. Yeah. But it's not like earning anything. Yeah. Right? Because that need has already been filled.
I mean, my focuses in life is, like protect my family, grow my businesses, and hopefully have some time at the end of the day to be happy. Yeah. I mean, that's really where I'm at. I have a huge focus on growing my businesses, and that's what's important to me. And obviously, like having a son now has changed some things with family, right? Right. Because I mean, anyone that
Kids
knows
do
my
that.
wife, she can handle herself.
Cool.
I mean, there's times I've had to tell her to relax a little bit when she's getting OG on somebody.
Oh, that's funny.
But
I can somewhat relate to that.
yeah, and so like now having a kid, it's like, okay, now it's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of adjust over here, but businesses to me has always been the same, and it's always been, I guess that's what it is. Like my driving thing is that 10 years from now, I could have been further than I'd ever thought I should be further than anywhere I thought I'd been. And we talked about on a podcast or two ago about dreaming big.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people don't even know what dreaming big is.
Right.
And so I guess going back to the whole aggression thing for me, like that is what drives me. One thing that makes me nervous about diving into a lot of this stuff
Mm-hmm.
is I feel like I'm doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, gosh, do you really want to change anything?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like I'm doing all right. I've accomplished a lot of things that I wanted to accomplish in my life at 32.
Yeah.
And so it's like, do you really want to change a lot of these core things about me?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there are ways to get better.
Right.
But I'm like, man, what happens if you end up like changing that one thing that got you here?
I mean, what would? Explore that.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. So like in Rapid Eye, a lot of time we check that fear of like, okay, so what would actually happen? What would it be?
Yeah.
What does that look like? And so many times it's like, it just is, it's as simple as the feeling of it, right? Or like something that we're scared of, or like, do we feel like we won't be the same? Well, is it something like people won't like me, or they will think that I'm different and that's not okay for some reason, right? Like I've definitely had those things myself where it's like, I mean, especially going into all of this, like what I'm doing, like I have learned how science and all of this plays huge parts in it. And it's like a lot of people still are like, oh, like you said, it's like voodoo, right? Like
Right.
where people are like, yeah, I don't want that, right? Like you're
Little witch doctor
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, exactly. And so for me, I had to be like, okay, Kassandra, like what's the worst that would happen if you step into this? What is it? Because for me, I could have been like, oh, you know what? I'm just a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
Like and I love being a stay-at-home mom. Like I'm not knocking that at all. Cause like if that's your calling, like you go,
Sure.
right? But it's like, for me, I knew that I was called to this.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so what is my hesitation? Where is this? Like what would happen?
Yeah. What's the alternative? That's what I
Right.
always ask my
Yeah.
guys that work for me and my buddies when they call me with
that's
stuff.
cool, yeah.
It's like, well, what, because they'll get so in their head about this one tunnel vision
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
And that's my number. Well, what's the alternative? And maybe I'm saying like, well, yeah, you have to do that because what's the alternative?
Right. It's like you're getting, they're answering it. Mhm.
Right. But yeah, a lot of the times, well, what's the alternative? Okay, well, I can go do this. I can take this route and this route. And I've tried to do that with myself a lot. My grandpa would always say, like, we'd be in the definition of insanity, right? Like doing the same thing multiple times, expecting a different outcome.
Yep.
And we'd be into like the second loop of it. And I can see it in my head, clear as day. He'll say, whoa, okay. He'll say, let's think about this for a second. He'll say, we're smart people.
Oh, I love it.
And then that's really opened me up to be like
I
a
love
lot
that.
less reactionary, a lot less, and it's like all the chaos that's going on at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay,
whoa, hang on a second.
relax.
Yeah.
We can figure this out. We're smart people.
Right? 100%. And I think if we could do that in every situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like think how different things could be. And I think, exactly. Like checking that fear and figuring out what it is, right? Like, it's like, I have 4 businesses already. You could be thinking, why would I take on this? And what if it affected all of these? That's the other thing we discussed, right? No coincidences.
Yeah.
So like, what if it did blow up? You learned,
Right.
right? Like you learned. And then what if you use that to go ahead and create 18 more businesses?
Right.
Because you learned what it was like to have this blow up and how to avoid that.
Right.
Or you help all these other people that are in this blow up and you're like, hey, like I've been there. Like, let me talk to you about this, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a reason for things.
Do you think people can learn from other people's experiences? Do you get what I mean? Like,
Oh,
like
totally.
a lot of people are like, oh, I have to mess up to learn for myself. Do you think that's a thing?
I think I would say yes and no.
Okay.
So I think you can definitely learn from other people, but at some point there is a difference. So like I would liken it to this. Like, could you go talk to a really good friend or a family member that does not have children and be like, hey, homie, like, look, like, just hear it from me. Like, having kids is, and you try to describe it, right? And you try to like help them prepare. Can you imagine, right? Like someone trying to do that to you before you had your son, and then you being like, oh, I learned all of that, right? And it's like, okay, people do learn. Like you do learn from other people, but it's still not the same when you experience it yourself. And not to mention you're different people.
Right.
When you experience something, it is different. You experience it differently. But you can definitely learn, especially if you're willing to like explore in yourself. So if you're taking what they're saying and not just looking at it from them, but you're like, okay, so now I'm going to take that and figure out like, okay, Kassandra normally operates like this. So what would I do? Like, okay, so Derick would react this way and he helped me figure out this, you know, okay, so in this situation, it might be explosive. So then it'd be like, okay, Kassandra, knowing how you are in these situations, right? And like trying it on instead of just looking at it and being like, yeah, no, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be a huge difference, is like applying it to yourself and trying it on and seeing like, okay, like for how I know I react, like you were saying, like you go super in deep in yourself and be like, hey, you know, these emotions and this emotion, how would I react if that happened? Right.
Okay.
And then learn from it in that way.
Yeah.
And being like, I went down that hole and I don't think that this would be for me, or I do, or whatever it is that you're learning at that point.
I mean, I guess I've felt it in both ways. Like I've never drank, I've never smoked, I've never done drugs, any of that. And because of different influences in my life when I was young, that's why I never have. Yeah. You know? But at the same time,
and that's why opposite a lot of other people do.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, and so I've had friends that have been like, well, I had to go screw up to learn from that. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, no.
You know, I'm like, this is so blatant, a bad thing.
In that case, I'd almost be like, they're using that to fuel their fire, right?
Sure.
Like it's almost like they're to kind of make themselves feel better. And like a lot of times they do that and they're not even necessarily aware, or they are, but they don't know how to do it differently.
Okay.
And so instead of being like I have done a lot of those things, and it's like how I grew up, and that did teach me that I don't want a part of any of that. Yeah. And like, if that's you, like you go learn how you want or do whatever. Right. But like, no, thank you. Like none of that is for me. And so it's like, if again, it goes back to like the thought, the perception, you know, those steps. And you're able to be accountable and be like, hey, you know what? Right now, this is what I'm choosing. And I don't really know any different. And maybe I do, but I don't want to choose that right now. There's power in that, because then once you acknowledge that in yourself, that's when things can start to change. You can be like, oh, why am I doing this? Right? Instead of just being like, you know what? This is numbing the problem over here, right? Here we go.
Yeah.
It's numbing the problem. So I'm just going to keep on doing that because it feels better right now. Okay. Instead of having to address that, like, that's one of those things where the fear comes in, where it's like, what would happen if I addressed what this is? What would happen? Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to feel really, really, really uncomfortable. I'm going to feel a lot of really painful, intense emotions and memories. And then what, though? Right? Keep going. And then what? You tell yourself, hey, like, it was okay to feel that. Take away the shame and reframe that, and right? And then it's like, oh, I don't need that shell anymore because I took it off and I figured out a different way, you know?
What would you tell someone? This just popped in my mind, so I'll share it.
Yeah.
What would you tell someone that maybe has been through trauma that they're not that they're scared to unpack, but
which is so valid if you are scared to unpack it.
But like that would almost, they would feel like is more of a negative thing to unpack.
I mean, again, it's like why wouldn't we think that if that's how we've been growing up and
Yeah.
we've raised and that our bodies told ourselves
So
that?
like, let me throw this, like a PTSD war vet. Like he's scared to unpack that because he doesn't know what's going to happen. What would you tell them?
I mean, I would be like, so what in your life is happening that you don't like right now?
Okay.
Right? So
Yeah.
like, what are your reactions?
What are those things affecting?
Yeah. And like, wouldn't it be worth it to go in and realize that like you don't have to operate that way anymore? Right? Like
Yeah.
you don't have to do those things. We just think we do. We think that it's natural, it's normal, everyone else is doing it, I'm okay, or I've just operated like this for so long. I don't know anything different. That's a huge part of it, is like the scared. Like, I don't know anything else, so what you're telling me is scary, or I've never done this before. What, but like that's why exploring that, like what is the worst that would happen, is so crucial and huge, because it's like, well, what is the worst that would happen if you did decide to confront it? What is the worst, right? Like if it's losing someone that went along with you, if it's seeing super traumatic things and going down that and like giving yourself that love and that validation that you need, working through using rapid eye to go from that part, reframe your brain, restructure it, do what you were saying, like replace these things with positive things. Because that's what it is. It's PTSD, right? It's like, and they're trained to be like, I got to do this, right? Like, and then it just keeps coming, and it's just like, and it's not like oops, I didn't know. It's like you got to back that on because you ain't feeling nothing, right? Like they're trained to do that. I mean, that's part of it. Is they want them to kind of be machines. Yeah. And so to break that down though, and then not be so reactionary, not take aggression out on your loved ones, or feel horrible inside, feeling all of those things inwardly, if that's what it is, right? Like there's so many different things with that. Yeah. And so that's what I would say was like, well, what would the worst that would happen would be? And 9 times out of 10, it is going to be a painful memory or emotion or experience. And then that's when it's like, okay, you give them that love and that validation and keep backing it up and rewiring it and take that out and keep working on it. And then pretty soon, okay, so now you're not feeling the need to numb anymore with it, if it's drugs, alcohol, if it's, the way you're behaving, if it's anger, if it's disassociating. And then now you're over here and you feel good now. Those things happen to you, but you feel good.
Yeah. And all those reactionary traits that your mind has
built. Those triggers.
Yeah. They're gone.
You're in the grocery store and you hear a loud noise or fireworks go off. Yeah. And you don't have to go somewhere else anymore. Like you can live your life. Yeah. Make those choices instead of being controlled by it.
Well, and because I've had those thoughts, and I'm not a war vet, but like, I'm not that extreme that we just talked about, but I've had those thoughts of, man, I don't know if I want to change anything. Right.
Right. Same. Same. I have too. It's like, man, that is a lot of trauma. I identified with it. Yeah. I did. It was like, that's a part of me. And that's who I am. And so it's like identifying with that. And then what am I if I take that away? Who am I? Yeah. And that's the cool part though. It's like if we can reframe that and be like, I am whoever I want to be. Right? It doesn't have to be like, oh, now she's not Kassandra anymore. Well, who's to say that anyway? Yeah. Like, because you don't think I'm Kassandra anymore? Like, well, that's you.
Yeah. Cool opinion, guy.
Right? Exactly. Like, that's you, but that's not me, Yeah.
Sorry, I had a beep right there. That was my fault.
You're good.
Give me 5 emotions that you think someone should function in. Maybe help me out with building my emotional home.
So that's kind of tough because we're very much like in Rapid Eye, it's very much like you honor where the person's at.
Give me your 5 for you.
So emotions, which is energy in motion, by the way.
Energy in motion. I like it.
5 emotions that I like to operate out of. I would say I like to operate out of vulnerability. Okay. If you want to call that an emotion. One.
Well, and you've been through multiple things, and being vulnerable, I'm sure, helps you. Yeah, I could see that.
It does. Well, and that's, again, it's like, it's reframed. It's not a negative thing. Yeah. It's a positive. I like to operate out of joy. I like to be joyful, laughing, happy. I like to feel fulfilled.
Okay.
That's like a big one for me, feeling good as far as like, it's not about anyone else. And if I start to wonder what the other people are thinking, I'm like, okay, Kassandra, what is it? What need is not being met inside of you? You know, like I'll have interactions with people that maybe don't know me super well or don't know what I'm about. And then I can tell, like you, I'm like reading all the symbols, you know, like their body, and I can feel their energy. Yeah, I can feel it, right? It's funny when someone else does it to you, because I feel that same way. I'm like, oh, crap, like they noticed. Yeah. But I am very in tune with that. Like I pick up on it. And that's a huge thing with like when you go through a lot of this, like it happens. Yeah. If you allow it to. And so then I'll start to take that on. And then I'm feeling like, ugh. You know, and it's like, man, this is something I enjoy and I feel confident about. And I'm talking to this person with it, you know, about this. And I'm feeling crappy. Why? And a lot of times it's because like I let what they think of me or their opinion cross over. And so then I'm like, oh, so am I having a confidence issue? Is there something that happened in my life where somebody treated me that way and that's why I don't feel good, right? Yeah. Excuse me. And so it's very much like about figuring out that inside of me. And so I like to feel secure, I guess, in who I am and what I'm about. And I guess going forward, like you could even say was that 3, 4? Would be more security as far as with my children around me. Like I feel like I've had lots of experiences in my life where I tried to control my environment and thinking that I could control other people based on how I do things, which is very common as people. Sure. Shocker. I've been the same way with employees. Yeah. And it's like classic case, but like a lot of people don't know this. And so trying to control by like, hey, I'm going to treat them this way. Like I used to think, well, with lots of different people, if I treat them this way, if I love them enough, if I do this thing this many times with them, then they won't behave this way anymore. Then they won't react angry. Or like, right? Like I'm in the grocery store. It could be as simple as a complete stranger. I'm in the grocery store and this person behind me is freaking out. And I'm like, hey, I can, and like, yeah, there's tools, right? But like thinking that I can actually get them to do it instead of just like, hey, I have tools if you would like them. Right? Yeah. The difference in that. And then I don't identify with it if it doesn't work out. Right? I'm not like, oh, like Kassandra couldn't affect that person. Like there's something wrong here. You know? Yeah. Instead of being like, hey, you know what? Like that was their choice. Right. Like they chose that.
You used what you were equipped with, and if they accept or deny it, that doesn't reflect on you.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And so learning that, like I would say, yeah, that's huge. And again, going back to like, that's one of the emotions that I guess I operate out of, if you want to consider that an emotion, because it's energy in motion.
There you go.
But yeah, was that 4 or 5?
Well, if you count security, that's 5.
Okay.
So that's great. I've been trying to, like you're saying, you don't know what you don't know. So I've been trying to broaden, you know,
trying
what
different
emotions that I would even have. Yeah.
Right.
Because I feel like I'm pretty narrow on my emotional field.
Well, and like that's what's cool in Rapid Eye too, is like we have charts. Like we have lists of emotions that we give to people. Like there's emotion wheels. Go Google an emotion wheel.
An emotion wheel. Okay.
And like it'll pull up and then it helps you identify what you're actually feeling. Cause so many times, like you said, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So it's like, man, I'm feeling super uncomfortable. So many times when people talked about anxiety, I thought it was exactly how I felt it. Cause I didn't know. Yeah. So I'm thinking like when they're like, man, I have anxiety. I'm like all over here feeling anxiety. My heart's racing. I'm like, you know, and they're like, oh, well, I don't experience it like that. And it's like, oh, really? Or like anger,
you're
right?
Like, it's not.
Exactly. Then that's not valid. But it's like, no, that's not true. Like, that's just different, right? Or like anger. Like some people are like explosive anger and they're yelling and they're breaking stuff, which I would call more like destructive and other things attached to that. But some people can be fuming and they're just like, yeah. You know, like sitting there. And so it's like, it really is a perception thing. you know? And so like, once we break that down and go clear back to our thoughts, like, where did this thought first come from? Oh, it's because when Jimmy down the road was angry, he broke and threw stuff. So that's what anger is in my mind, right?
Yeah.
Like, it stems from somewhere. Or like happiness. Happiness looks like what Joe Schmo down the block has, and he has 18 cars and drives a Benz and has, you know, all these things. And so that's what happiness is. And it's like, if we can go back to that very first thought and figure that out and what it is for us. Well, what is happiness to Kassandra? Is happiness 18 cars? No. I mean, would I like a really fun supercar? Yeah, cool.
You're like, I will take a Benz if anyone gives me one.
Right. I will not say no. But yeah, it's like, no, that is not happiness.
What is happiness for you?
Happiness for me is a lot to do with just feelings. Like, that's why I felt it so interesting when you asked me what the 5 feelings I would say are.
Yeah.
Happiness for me is very much like being comfortable with who I am and being comfortable with what I've experienced, and also using it for the greater good. I'm very much like a humanitarian person.
Okay.
Growing up, I wanted to be a humanitarian. I literally at one point was like, you know what, God, like, if you want me to go be a humanitarian, I will take my kids and have nothing. And like, again, if God wants us, like, my children's best interest, but it's like, if we're traveling and just helping people, like, my great, like, you know how people ask you, like, what's, if one thing you could like do for whatever, like the world, or one thing you could have. And my thing is always like, if everyone could just feel and know that they are loved to their core, like, and know it.
Yeah.
Not just like believe it or think it, but to know it and what that would look like in the world, you know?
I mean, there's probably not anything more powerful, right?
Right?
I mean, I don't think of anything.
Right?
Happiness, love. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but that's like my heart, you know, is like, I care so deeply. And so that's why it has been hard sometimes when it doesn't go how I hope, you know, because I do want the best for everybody.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm not capable of going about the best ways about it. I do things wrong or different. And so then those thoughts would kick in, and it's like, oh, you did this wrong, Kassandra. You know, I'm not perfect by any means. Yeah. I have lots of tools that help me, but I am not trying to kid you here. Like, I have lots of things that I work on myself on like sometimes a minute by minute basis. You know, I am not perfect. I'm very flawed. But when I admit that, and I own it, instead of using that as like a shameful thing or a negative thing, it's like, because here's the thing, same with everyone else, right?
Yep.
Right? And then it takes that away. We don't have to feel crappy anymore. We don't have to feel shameful, because it's like, despite what they might trying to get you to see, like, that's actually not true. Right? Like, even if they're happy, the most happy person in the entire world, like, they're flawed.
Yeah.
You know, they're going to make mistakes. And they're probably the happiest person in the entire world because they will admit that to you. And they will go fix it. And they will say they're sorry or figure it out however that it looks like, right? I mean, that's the thing, is like, and so for me, that's what happiness is.
That's great. How can someone get in contact with you?
So I have an Instagram. It's called thewholesoul.llc.
Okay.
And on there, it does have, if you go to contact, it has my phone number and my email. Or my whole soul is my email is thewholesoul.kr@gmail.com. So you can email me too. And just ask questions. You can ask whatever you want.
Yeah. I think there's going to be I hope that there's a lot of people that reach out to you, because I think that you have a lot of tools that people are unaware of.
Right.
I've learned a lot today about what you can do. And
That's awesome.
I mean, I may even come and see you So do you have like like an office space?
So that's kind of what I'm working towards right now. I'm still kind of in limbo a little bit with that.
Well, you're brand new, so I can imagine.
Well, and like I can do phone sessions too.
Okay.
So that's the other thing, especially like if it's like this, where we're just kind of figuring out what types of things it is that you need. And there's so many other things. Like, I mean, there's like we do eye patching. There's science behind when you patch one eye and like the eye patch has like a foam and your eye is still open. It's literally balancing out your brain. So like your left and right hemisphere. And like it's tools that like you see a medic and they're like, you know, tracking, like you're literally getting your left and right brain to talk back and forth. Because what like the trauma is like in a certain part of your brain. And so if you can balance it out, it's like, oh, okay, like I feel better now.
Yeah.
And there's like a lot of studies behind that. So there's just a lot of tools. Tapping is a huge thing that I can teach. So it doesn't have to just go straight into like, what's the worst trauma you have? I mean, I'm game for that too, because that's how I am. I'm like, let's go there, right? Like, and let's get all of it done and worked on. But there are so many tools, and I am working on that. So like that was part of it, a single mom, 4 kids, right? School's starting. And so I'm like, okay, now that school's starting, I can like actually have the means and the time to be able to kind of like put this together a lot more in a more feasible way.
Yeah.
But I do like phone sessions or like rent a space. That's what I've done in the past.
Sure.
So like if people are very interested in seeing me in person, I can definitely rent a space and stuff. So just contact me and we'll figure it out.
Right.
Like let's just
doesn't
figure it
have
out.
to be weird. We'll cater to what we need to cater to.
Exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be like a taboo thing, you know, like you can just be like, hey, I've never like looked into this before. Like, you know, I'm not like, oh, sorry. Like, you know what I mean? Like
if you Venmo me $9.99, we can talk.
yeah. And then future payment. No. Yeah, exactly.
It's a subscription.
Yeah. No, just talk to me and we'll figure it out, you know?
That's great. Facebook.
I don't have a Facebook
else?
yet.
Okay, so Instagram, email, and then your contact information's on Instagram.
And then you can, if you want, you can link that too on the
we will.
Whatever.
We'll put it on our descriptions.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that way.
Yeah. That's great. Well, everybody go and follow Kassandra and her journey. I think we need to get back together in a year.
I would love that. And I love Nicole too. That's like the other thing I wanted to say like Nicole and I, like we're brainstorming, like we want to go do like public speaking and just kind of create awareness, like help people understand like, hey, like, you know, we understand a lot of you are dealing with this and just don't talk about it. Yeah. And she has so many healing modalities too. And we're going to like, I love Nicole. We're going to team up and we're going to figure some cool stuff out. Yeah.
And then you do have a speaking engagement coming up.
I do. Yeah. In November, I'm speaking at a conference and though that it's still being rolled out the details to that, but I can let you know. And if you want to like tag that,
we'll share it or whatever we can do to help on that.
Yeah.
Okay. It's great. I think we'll wrap it up.
Well, thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming. So everyone, make sure you share the podcast. If you did not like this, then quit listening to us. No, I
then
really
come see Kassandra because she can help you for that.
Clearly have trauma and shells. So thanks for listening. Give us a share, give us a review, all that great stuff. And again, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.